We're good to go? Wonderful. It's 2 p.m. So now we'll call this meeting to order. It's the Rural Initiatives and Planning Advisory Committee for the 24th of June. We have an agenda that's been published. Everyone,
I'll move that we adopt the agenda.
thank you, Sally. By Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Giguère. Be resolved that the agenda be approved as presented. All in favor? That's carried. You don't need to have.
If we can see her.
Okay. Good. Moving on with the minutes, the adoption of the minutes. I don't happen to have them in front of me. When were they? January the 5th?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, has everyone had opportunity to peruse them? If there are no errors or omissions, I will entertain a motion to adopt them as presented. Moved by Warden French, seconded by Councillor Giguère. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And we'll remind committee members of disclosures of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Not seeing any. No delegations, which brings us to section 6, briefings. It's the official plan review, discussion paper number 5, population, housing, and employment forecast and associated land needs analysis. I'm going to turn this over to you, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the committee, I'll firstly like to introduce Mr. Paul Hicks. He is our acting manager of planning here at the county. He will be providing a brief review of his staff report, followed by a PowerPoint presentation from Stefan from Hempson Consulting, who were retained by the county specifically to undertake and provide guidance with respect to population, housing, and employment forecasts and associated lands needs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hicks. Paul, can you hear us?
Can't hear him.
I guess he can't. Okay, with that, I'll then.
Sorry, Brian. It was I was having some technical difficulty there.
If you could proceed, Paul, with the presentation of your staff report, that'd be great.
No problem. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everybody. The staff report that I've prepared for committee today is really just a covering memo with regards to the presentation that we're about to hear today. So as a part of the 5-year review, as this committee will certainly be aware of, a number of discussion papers and position papers have been prepared in support of the official plan review. These papers have covered a number of topics such as servicing and development, the changes to the provincial policy statement and general provincial policy, the Elgin Natural Heritage System Study, housing affordability, and then finally the last paper that has been produced is with regard, and the subject of today's presentation is with regards to population projections and growth management. As with any official plan review, likely kind of what I would refer to as kind of the rub or one of the more important topics that gets covered in an official plan review are actually the land needs assessment and population projections. So these are the assessments that are telling us how we're growing and where we're going to grow. So they have direct impact on everything from land values to development opportunities that we see across the county, as well as even servicing considerations such as where we should be expanding municipal water, municipal sanitary sewer systems too. So the report that has been prepared jointly by Hempson and Stantec. Hempson was concentrating their efforts on the population projections and the land needs assessment, while their colleagues at Stantec were preparing a report and a review of growth management policies and making some recommendations on what we should be changing in our official plan as it relates to growth management. The report was originally submitted to the municipality, or pardon me, to the county in March of this year. And since that time, it's gone through a couple revisions and refinements just to make sure that it meets the needs of both the county of Elgin as well as the constituent municipalities, because these population and projections and land needs assessments will also be used by the local municipalities in updating their own official plans as well. So to that end, we're now at the end of this particular journey in the development of these discussion papers and the completion of this particular discussion paper. So what's before committee today, in terms of a staff recommendation, is a staff recommendation to endorse the population and land needs, population projection and land needs assessment that has been prepared by Hempson and Stantec, and to forward that to County Council for further endorsement. Should committee determine that they wish to forward this to County Council for endorsement, and should County Council endorse the report, it will be posted for public commenting. So that public commenting period includes the general public, as well as constituent municipalities, as well as special interest groups, and the development industry will have the opportunity to provide comment and feedback on the report. I won't go into too great a detail on the contents of the report. I will allow our colleagues from Hempson and Stantec to do so. But certainly from the staff perspective, I'm quite satisfied that the report has been prepared in accordance with all provincial guidelines and is of a standard that I do believe is going to serve the county well. And certainly my recommendation to this committee would be to endorse the report and to forward it to County Council for further endorsement.
With that, Mr. Chair, we'll now turn it over to Stefan to proceed with his presentation.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Paul, for that introduction, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of this committee. I'm assuming you can hear me, and I see a nod. Yes, thank you. So my name is Stefan Cetrinovic. I'm an associate partner at Hempson. I'm with my colleagues, Russell Matthew from Hempson and Amy Sloan from Stantec Consulting. We're going to be taking you through a presentation that's structured sort of around 30 minutes, and it'll be split into two parts. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes on the results of the long-range growth forecasts for the county and the assessment of the county's long-term urban land requirements that Paul just described. And then Amy's going to speak for about 10 minutes on the growth management policy recommendations that are set out in the final report, which we released for you earlier this month. Next slide, please. So as Paul set out, this is one of several technical background reports to support your new official plan. And the focus of this report is really on growth management, specifically how much population, housing, and employment can be expected over the next 25 to 30 years in Elgin, and how much land will be needed in order to accommodate that growth. Just a brief word about the timeframes in the report. The provincial policy statement, which I'm sure this committee is aware, it's the guiding policy document for land use planning in Ontario, to which your official plan must be consistent with. That requires that the county provide sufficient land to meet projected needs up to 25 years, i.e. to 2046. And what you'll see in our report is that we look at land needs out to 2051, which is a 30-year time horizon. Something we agreed to do at the outset of this project, really in order to assess if there were any land shortages that might appear in the 2040s, and whether there were steps that needed to be taken to address those through this official plan. Well, I'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we go through. Suffice to say that the work we've done has been done in close consultation with planning staff and consultants of the lower tier municipalities. And I wanted to thank all of those staff for taking the time to meet with us and reviewing the work. I think that's reflected in the final results. Just a final thing about the date at which this report was released. As Paul mentioned, the work was completed in March, and the report was released in draft then. So it incorporates the first release of the 2021 census data, which came out in February, and relates to Elgin's population and housing. It doesn't include data from the second release of the census, which was in late April, and that's relating to housing by type. However, updating the results that you see today to reflect this second data release would not materially affect the forecasts or any of the policy recommendations that we're going to present to you. And I should also note that Stats Canada is going to be continuing to release census data in tranches over the coming months, in fact, over the coming year. So we will be monitoring these and we'll report to county staff on the implications of those results for this exercise. Next slide, please. I just wanted to speak briefly about some of the key themes that have informed our assumptions about the future growth outlook in Elgin. We are forecasting 25 to 30 years into the future, and that's quite a long forecast horizon. And there's a lot of uncertainties along the way. However, there will be many opportunities to adjust those forecasts and the official plan during that period. So getting the near-term growth, especially over the next 10 years, is in many ways more important than getting the 2046 or the 2051 number right. Even though those are the numbers that you're going to see in this presentation and you're going to see in that report. One thing that's clear about the current situation in Elgin is that there's been a surge of growth since around about the time of the 2016 census. This growth is not unique to Elgin County. So we've seen a similar pattern in other jurisdictions, and there's a slide coming up that'll show you sort of how that's manifesting itself around the so-called Greater Golden Horseshoe that's centered on the Greater Toronto Area and along the 401 corridor down to Windsor. And there are varying reasons for this surge. Demographically speaking, there's a bit of a double cohort of people buying homes right now. So the peak millennials just turned 31. They are partnering up with each other. They are starting to have children, and they want to buy their first home. And the peak baby boomers who just turned 61 are still very much in the housing market. So this has contributed to a rise in house prices. It's pushed a lot of home buyers, especially first-time home buyers, further away from city centers. And you've witnessed this phenomenon certainly in central Elgin. Young families seeking more affordable single detached homes mainly, but still within a reasonable commuting distance of St. Thomas and increasingly London. And we expect this phenomenon to continue, certainly in the short term, and mostly in those parts of the county that are close to London and St. Thomas. And then as we move towards the eastern and western parts of the county, people tend to work closer to home. We certainly expect those areas to grow as well, certainly in the established urban centers like Aylmer, but the growth pressure won't be quite as significant as what we see in central Elgin and Southold. As far as COVID goes, COVID seems to have exacerbated the growth surge in many areas. It's triggered early retirement among a lot of people. It's triggered a move outside the city centers by people who have a second home or a seasonal residence. And in some cases, it may have caused people to leave city centers because they can now work from home. And we're still a little unsure about whether these COVID-induced changes are temporary or permanent, or indeed whether they are, in fact, a big part of what we've seen in recent years in Elgin. So our forecasts are not predicated on any significant growth in the county from retirees and work-at-home workers over and above what we might experience given sort of recent trends moving forward. So COVID is not a big part of what you see in the numbers coming forward. On the employment side, the county is primed, we think, for quite significant employment growth, in part because more people will generate more jobs, but more importantly, because the county has some employment areas that are very well located, either close to its major settlement areas or that are easily accessible from, the highway corridor. And of course, the Amazon fulfillment center is evidence of, the kind of storage, distribution, logistics activities that could develop on those kinds of lands moving forward. Next slide, please. So this chart illustrates what's a fairly complex pattern of population growth that we've seen over the last 35 years in the Elgin Census Division. So that's the area that includes the county and the city of St. Thomas. And you can see between, the mid-1980s and the 2008-2009 recession, population growth generally declined in the county and increased in the city. So the red is the county growth, which came down, and the gold is the city's growth, which went up. The recession hit hard, both in the county and the city. And as you all know, of course, this was a center of manufacturing, and manufacturing was one of those hardest hit sectors during this period. But you can see in recent years, we're well into a recovery phase with a return to job growth and the migration of people into the area at a level that we haven't really seen since the mid-1980s. Next slide, please. You can see the, oops. Yes, that one, thank you. That's right. So this just gives you the population specific growth pattern for the county more clearly. This is the annual growth over the last year in the county alone, and it's pretty sporadic in the early part of the 2000s, and we see that general decline during and after the recession, where actually the county lost population. Before that sort of long recovery starts in around 2014, 2015. That recovery, you can see, predates COVID. So things were happening before the pandemic hit. And we have had a bit of a slowdown in the last couple of years, though still certainly in the historical context, still quite rapid growth. And, this is evidence of that phenomenon I was speaking about earlier. A socioeconomic relationship that's developing beyond St. Thomas and attracting people to live from further afield, particularly the London area, which includes the London Census Metropolitan area, which includes Central Elgin and Southold because of those commuting relationships. But also, the early retiree phenomenon in places like Port Stanley, Port Burwell, and the other shoreline communities. Next slide, please. I said earlier that population growth at the fringe of, the Greater Toronto Area or the Greater Golden Horseshoe, that larger area around the GTA and the 401 corridor, it is not unique to Elgin. So you can see, well, you might not because it's quite small, but the overall pattern I think is apparent. Out migration from that, metropolitan area centered around Toronto and Hamilton, that's putting pressure on communities in Simcoe and Grey counties to the north, Northumberland and Hastings counties to the east, and places to the west, like Oxford County, Niagara Region, and Brant, and Elgin County, of course. And housing affordability concerns are tied to that for sure. And that's bringing parts of Oxford County into the commuter belt of Kitchener-Waterloo. And as I say, parts of Elgin into the London commuter belt as well. Next slide, please. You can see the growth pressures, where the growth pressures are within the county in this slide. So this is the number of building permits issued for new homes in the lower tier municipalities and in St. Thomas between 2011 and 2016, which is in the gold, and between 2016 and 2021, which is in the red. So a couple of things to note, of course. all municipalities are experiencing higher growth. The pressure that we're talking about, it's pretty widespread. But secondly, the rate of growth is not, or the rate of increase is not uniform. It's been much faster in St. Thomas and certainly in Central Elgin, which has had about 45% of the new building permits for new units in the last 5 years, but also Southwold as well, which has seen a very rapid increase. And again, that's part of the effect of the London commuters that I've mentioned already. Next slide, please. The land needs analysis for the county is done in two parts, one for residential lands, which is focused around housing, and the other is for the land that's specifically designated for employment activities. So when we look at the community area, the residential lands, the first step in that exercise is to do a population forecast, and that's set out in this chart. The county's forecast is shown in the green bars, and the St. Thomas is shown in gold for reference purposes only. And so, you know, when we look at the green moving forward, the forecast period sort of starts in the middle and moves forward, and to the left is the historical stuff. So, you know, you can see that, you know, pretty much within every period of time between now and 2051, the forecast is for quite rapid population growth, faster than any time since the early 1990s. With growth continuing in the short term at the fast rate we've seen in the last 5 years, and then slowing down as we move through the period, partly because, like most of the province and St. Thomas, the population in Elgin is aging overall. So that will have a dragging effect on growth as we head into the 2030s and 40s. Next slide, please. In step 2 of the residential land needs analysis, we translate the population forecast into a forecast of housing, and we distinguish between the different types of housing because, after all, different housing types have different land needs. The rate of housing growth in Elgin will be faster than the rate of population growth, and certainly the younger age structure of people that are moving to the county will mean that there will still be an overwhelming preference for single detached homes. However, we have assumed through the forecast period, as the population ages and as planning policies are put into place to encourage, you know, intensification and redevelopment as urban communities mature, that the county will see a greater range and mix of housing, particularly apartment housing, as time goes by. So you can see from this chart how the overall housing stock becomes a little bit more diverse as we move through the period, with more row houses, those are shown in gold, and more apartments, those are shown in red, in 2046 and 2051 than there are today. Next slide, please. The next step then is to allocate the housing growth to each of the lower tier municipalities. We look very closely at historical growth patterns. We look at active plans for development, and we look at the urban structure of each municipality when doing this exercise. And, you know, we've already said that the recent growth surge has been mainly focused in Central Elgin. And certainly in the short term, given the increasingly close relationship between that municipality and London and St. Thomas, we would expect that to continue. So about a third of all future housing is forecast to be in that municipality. Important to note, however, that all municipalities are forecast to grow, even those like Southwold, Dutton, Dunwich, and West Elgin that have experienced population decline at times during the last 15 years. Next slide, please. Most housing growth will take place in the urban settlement areas, those tier 1 settlement areas that are identified in your official plan, that have full municipal services, and they're the ones that are shown in purple on this map. And directing growth to those areas is consistent with the provincial planning policy. Some growth, particularly in apartment forms, will take place as intensification or redevelopment of existing built up areas within those mainly tier 1 settlement areas. And that housing does not need any additional urban land for its needs. So there's about 16% of new housing that we anticipate to take the form of intensification. There'll also be a limited amount of growth, pretty much in line with historical trends, that will take place in rural areas. And those can either be the unserviced rural settlements, those tier 3 settlement areas, some of which are shown in green here, or as rural severances or infilling of existing lots of record in the rural area. But the vast majority of growth will be on land that's designated for residential use at the edge of the tier 1 and tier 2 settlement areas. What the province refers to as designated growth areas, or what's commonly referred to as greenfield lands. Next slide. Thank you. So this table just breaks down the distribution of housing in each municipality between intensification, the rural areas, and the designated growth areas, the greenfield areas. And really, I don't propose to go through each number, but we can certainly answer questions about them at the end. The key ones I want to highlight are the two bottom rows in bold. That shows you the distribution of the new housing across the county as a whole. So we have 16% of the units taking place as intensification. We have 8% of the units taking place in the rural area. And then we have about 76% taking place in the designated growth areas. About 5,500 units in those tier 1 and 2 settlement areas. Next slide, please. So the last step of the residential land needs analysis is really to determine whether there's enough land in that designated growth area that's already been designated to accommodate those 5,500 units. And the results are, with the exception of Aylmer, that all municipalities have enough land to accommodate their population and housing growth needs to 2051. Aylmer runs out of residential land shortly after 2041. We'll probably need around 20 additional hectares of land by 2051, which is around 600, it's equivalent for about 600 homes. So we do have a shortage of land in Aylmer. It's a very long-term issue. It's not something that will come into play in the next 10 years. So the options that Amy's going to lay out for you for dealing with this issue can certainly be explored more fully in the coming years without really jeopardizing the growth prospects for the town or for the county. Next slide, please. I'm just going to finish up talking a little bit about employment. Employment's a little bit trickier than population and housing. We've got less statistical information on which to rely. But, suffice to say that we appear to be on an upward trajectory with job growth right now. And that's encouraging. Certainly the London census metropolitan area returned to its pre-pandemic employment much quicker than most of the rest of Ontario. And of course, we have some one-off industrial developments, the Amazon Fulfillment Center for sure, that we need to get right and that are coming to fruition as well. So that's all very positive. Next slide. We believe that this is a good basis on which to forecast fairly robust and sustained job growth over the next 25 to 30 years. There will, of course, be ups and downs moving forward. Recessions are going to occur, but overall, growth will be higher than in recent years. Next slide, please. There are different types of employment that trigger different land needs. Generally, we think about employment as being taking the form of three types when we plan for land. So there are jobs that will generally follow the population growth. And that's shown in green here, the population-related employment, and that's mainly sort of local retail and local services that are catering to residents. There are jobs that will certainly occur in the rural area, and they are very important in parts of Elgin. Certainly agricultural related activities. There's a lot of agricultural seasonal labor in the eastern part of the county, but also increasingly tourism. So that will continue to be an important share of the overall employment base. But the majority of the job growth will be on those designated employment lands, the industrial areas, the business parks, and that's shown in gold here, with that big gold bar in 2021-26 being the jobs associated with Amazon. Next slide, please. So this chart shows you the distribution of the employment growth to 2051 for all the municipalities. So again, this is job growth that's both population related. So, you know, there will be a lot of that stuff in Aylmer, which is very much a regional service center for much of the eastern part of the county. But if we go to the next slide, there will, of course, be a lot of job growth on those employment lands, and not all employment areas in the county have equal prospects for development. So there are some very well located lands, you know, that are serviced, that have good highway access, as I mentioned earlier, that are close to, you know, a ready supply of labor in St. Thomas and London, and also offer the opportunity for those large developers to amass large land parcels. So West Elgin, Southwold, Aylmer, Bayham, they all play important roles and will play important roles in accommodating this type of employment, especially Southwold. Next slide, please. So this just summarizes the employment land needs for the county as a whole. There's about 265 hectares of vacant employment lands in Elgin, and we estimate that about 170 hectares will be needed to accommodate the employment land employment to 2051. So there is therefore an excess of supply, and that exists both at the county level and at the local level. Next slide, please. So just to sum up before I hand it over to Amy, the county has a sufficient land to accommodate the population and housing forecasts to 2051. In fact, there is a theoretical excess of about 340 hectares across the county. You know, although you know, some of those lands may not, you know, be the most suitable for residential development. But the only place where we are confident there will be a shortage of land in the 2030 in the 30-year time horizon is in Aylmer, and they'll probably need about 20 hectares by 2051. And on the employment side, there is sufficient land across the county and at the local level to accommodate the forecast job growth. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Amy, who's going to speak a little bit about the growth management policy recommendations that are in our report. And I think we can skip 2 slides. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Stefan, for that introduction. As he's noted, my name's Amy Sloan. I'm a senior planner with Stantec Consulting out of the London office, where we work closely with the Southwestern Ontario development community. I'm also a local resident of the area. So for the next 10 minutes, I'll just go over the appendix document that Stantec had completed and was accompanying the Hemson report. So this appendix really just assesses kind of the demographic and technical background that Hemson did and connects those findings back to the potential revisions or possible recommendations that could be included in the ongoing official plan update with regard to the growth management policies for Elgin County. So the first recommendation is simple. It would just be to include the county official plan, or to update the county official plan to reflect that current population, household, and job forecast that Hemson has found in their report. And it should be just noted that the forecast to 2046 are required to be noted within the official plan document, because that is the growth horizon for designating new residential land. And then the 2051 projections could also be listed separately, because municipalities can plan for future infrastructure and other public services beyond that 25-year horizon. So they can both be listed within the official plan for Elgin, and then local municipalities would then take their respective forecasts and include them in the next update to their local OPs. Second recommendation of the report is to really take a look at the Tier 1 settlement areas that are within, like the number of Tier 1 settlement areas within Schedule A of the official plan, and trying to determine where the broadest range and mix of uses and residential densities should be directed within the different settlements of Elgin County, and potentially considering implementing a sub-tier of the Tier 1 settlement areas, such as a Tier 1A type settlement hierarchy, where a greater diversity and range of densities could be located. So things like small apartments, retirement homes, and multi-residential condominium communities kind of could be located in potentially some Tier 1 settlement areas within Elgin, but not others. So this could be a good chance to look at the Schedule A designations now and to provide some kind of different outlook on the growth within each settlement area. The third recommendation of the report is to encourage growth management decisions that would be integrated with planning for school boards and other public amenities, especially the services that aren't specifically provided or directly provided by the county, such as schools, public and post-secondary schools, and potentially even things like colleges or other uses like that could be planned for within the future growth of Elgin County. The last recommendation on this slide would be to refine the county's policies regarding their local official plans and potentially providing minimum intensification targets that better align with Hempson's findings. So there is a table within the Hempson report that identifies that some municipalities have a greater capacity to support intensification just due to the amount of vacant lands within them. So potentially there could be extra guidance within the county's official plan to direct lower tiers accordingly when they update their policies. Next slide, please. So the next recommendation here is to look at community improvement plans, or CIPs. I know Elgin has a healthy community improvement plan ongoing right now. So those programs could actually be investigated a little bit further, and there could be specific programs for targeted funding areas to priority areas where there's existing vacant or underutilized lands that are kind of very prevalent within some of the lower tiers. And those programs can include things like waiving or reducing application fees under the Planning Act. And that would serve to encourage some of those higher density uses where there's vacant lands to support them. Recommendation 6 of the report is to encourage local municipalities to create minimum density requirements for intensification and redevelopment applications. In addition, municipalities can also create minimum requirements for applications within designated growth lands or those greenfield lands. And those specific density requirements don't need to necessarily mirror each other. They could be slightly different for infill projects versus greenfield development based on the local municipalities' kind of development trends or community character. And that sort of thing. So that applying that unit per hectare minimum requirement could be good to have across the county, so local municipalities have a bit more certainty on what the bar is for new development coming into the county. Recommendation 7 is to review the official plan policies and ensure that there's no indirect restrictions on infill development. Often these types of policies aren't within the county official plan right now, but they are within local official plans. And they could include things like kind of misaligned parking requirements or restrictions on housing types within certain residential areas, or even overly descriptive compatibility requirements about shadowing or setbacks or lot coverage, which are often located or housed within local policies and bylaws. So the recommendation here is to just ensure that Elgin uses their review capacity of those lower tiers to make sure there's no overly restrictive policies that restrict additional, potentially more dense types of housing, such as small apartments and that sort of thing. Recommendation 8 is to look at the second unit policies within the OP and then clarify some pieces about the second unit requirements. Those policies have been updated at a provincial level since the OP was the 2015 OP. Some of the things that municipalities would be looking at kind of from the county level is whether or not mobile homes would be considered a second unit or garden suites, whether or not those are considered second units in the residential or rural area, or if you could have a garden suite plus a second unit, for instance, on a farm. Other things that should probably or could be regulated from a county level are whether or not second units would be considered, should be located within hazard lands or floodplains. And then just the other types of local OPs or the other types of regulations that local zoning bylaws can use to regulate second units within their zoning bylaws. This could include things like the amount of extended footprint that a second unit would be permitted if it was within a existing single detached house, for instance. Next slide, please. The county can also consider including policies in their OP that outline the diversity of uses that are either currently planned or available within certain settlement areas, and including that within the descriptions of the tiered settlement area hierarchies. So in addition to the level of kind of soft and hard service, or in addition to the level of like hard infrastructure that is available within each settlement area, they could also use things like the soft services within a settlement area to determine where their hierarchy lands on that kind of Schedule A of the settlement area hierarchy within the county. Recommendation 10 is for the county to provide policy that encourages local municipalities to determine the feasibility and appropriate locations of the designated employment lands. So as part of the provincial policy statement recent updates, there was an extra kind of requirement that the county can play a more integrated role within the respective official plan updates or secondary planning processes to ensure that employment lands are located appropriately within lower tier municipalities or local municipalities. So things that could be considered when looking at that policy would be the types of parcel sizes within their existing designated employment areas, the locations and access to higher order transportation networks, and then the markability of those sites based on the industry trends that are currently prevailing. Next slide, please. So the recommendation here is to consider supporting the development of complete communities within the requirements for growth in the designated growth areas. So descriptions of some of those policies, I've included some specific potential language that could be included in the OP. So saying things like the new development areas will provide for and identify locations of various proposed land uses, including parks, open spaces, schools, and community facilities, as well as commercial areas that are intended to meet that or intended to equitably meet the day-to-day needs of the resident. Also a sentence like new development will provide roads and pathways that support all modes of active transportation and vehicular movement, considering access points and design. The 12th recommendation is regarding locating specific agricultural, supporting, or rural economic development opportunities. And it has to do with recommending that Tier 3 settlement areas are recognized within policy as a prime location for directing things like agricultural related commercial and industrial uses, as well as agritourism and other value-added agricultural services. So having some kind of guiding policies in the county official plan would help to ensure that there's a bit more certainty around where those uses should be located in the lower tiers. We know that Tier 3 settlement areas are an important location for existing growth, and they have often great locations on county roads. And locating agricultural businesses in these locations, may serve to reduce some of the loss of other prime agricultural lands that could be scattered throughout the county, or the purely rural areas of the county. Next slide, please. So as Stefan said, there is some options to resolve that kind of Elmer lack of growth, deficiency of land supply. As he noted, the deficiency of land supply kind of won't come into play for the next little while, probably after that 10-year period within the future of Elgin County's growth, but it would be good to consider some options now and what the county can do to kind of address this issue as it comes up. So I guess 13 to 17 here aren't necessarily options. I mean, they're not necessarily all things that the county would want to put into place at one time, but they're potential options the county could choose to use for addressing the specific land constraint within the county. So 13 here, or the first one, is reducing the overall number of Tier 1 settlement areas within the county. This would serve to provide a little bit more certainty that the town of Elmer is a key location and intended to support a mix of uses and densities, and it might provide some reassurance for the efforts to expand their servicing capacity and advance growth within that specific location. The next option would be to reallocate Tier 2 lands from other municipalities based on considerations like avoidance of had the highest priority agricultural lands potentially, or other considerations like that. So these settlement areas are partially serviced, and or some of the Tier 2 settlement areas are partially serviced and can only support limited growth in the form of infill and rounding out. So relocating some of their other vacant lands is something the county can do, and I guess in a way that could have them be transferred to the town of Elmer. The county could also reallocate some of the Tier 1 vacant lands within the other municipalities that could have the highest or the greatest supply currently. So Bayham, Southold, I think in West Elgin are some of the sites that Hempson's report have identified as the greatest supply of vacant lands within their Tier 1 settlement areas. And if growth hasn't been expected to occur there, there could be a reallocation as well towards the town of Elmer. Another option would be to evaluate or characterize, I guess, the town of Elmer as one of those Tier 1A settlement areas, which kind of ties back into recommendation 2. So elevating their position within Schedule A could serve to position the town as a key growth node for the county, and then recognize that it plays an important regional service center function within the entire county growth management system. The last option presented here would be that there is an option under the PPS that the county can allow for Elmer to reallocate some of their existing vacant lands, which they have about, I think, 37.5 hectares of. They can combine that vacant land need with their expected land need, which is the 20 hectares. They could reallocate the 37.5 hectares to one location and adding that other 20 hectares. And that could potentially provide an easier planning for community infrastructure if all those vacant or designated growth lands get directed to one location, kind of on the periphery of the existing town of Elmer. And that could make servicing become more feasible in that location. So that could be an option for the town and the county to think about moving forward. And that is my last slide. So I think that concludes our presentation, unless I'm mistaken. I guess I'll pass it back to Stefan and the chair. So if there's any questions, we're here to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Amy and Stefan. I'm going to turn to the committee. Are there any questions for Stefan or Amy regarding the presentations? There was a lot of material there to digest.
We're considering it tomorrow at Central Ogden too, or Monday, I mean.
Yeah, Dominique.
Yes, I don't have to turn a microphone on.
Nope.
Oh, thank you. You mentioned at the beginning that there was consultation with lower tiers, and but I'm wondering about the timing, because I know a lot of different plans were happening in parallel. So I'm thinking of, Malahide and Southold were just recently passed their own official plans, and I'm wondering if what's in here is fully aligned with where, Malahide or Southold or other lower tiers have landed. And so would there be a chance perhaps to go back before going to the public, to go back just to confirm and align? Because I would hate for the public to be confused about different numbers or different projections or different areas of growth that have been identified. I don't know who can answer that, but I was curious when that consultation happened, and then is there a chance to maybe just revisit before we go live?
Yeah. I think Paul.
Through the chair, I'm happy to take a stab at answering that question. So with respect to the Southold official plan, so it was they undertook the development of a new official plan, and Malahide undertook a 5-year review, which was essentially a large amendment to the existing Malahide plan, as I'm sure you very well know, and particularly with regards to Malahide. In the Southold situation, and that had gone through a full review of their own land needs analysis, and they had adjusted their urban boundaries accordingly. So the county council had made a decision on the Southold official plan, had approved that. So they essentially, I'll try to say this in a way. Essentially, the book is closed on the Southold official plan. So they had conducted their independent review in advance of this review being completed. It was certainly found to be in accordance with provincial policy. Certainly from a staff perspective, on my end, I didn't see any issue with it. The province had an opportunity to review it as well too. The province didn't take any issue with it. I wouldn't suggest there's full alignment with this particular report, but because they were undertaking the review in advance of this report coming out, it's kind of they just happen to be just by nature out of step with each other. But at the end of the day, that had gone through our own independent review. It had gone through the review by Municipal Affairs and Housing as well too. So there weren't any issues that were identified in the development of the new Southwold official plan. Similar story with respect to Malahide, in the sense that Malahide was you undertook your review in advance of this report becoming public as well. And so there were growth projections, and there was a land needs analysis that was also done by the team at Malahide and their planning consultants. And both of these municipalities also would have had opportunity to have some feedback into this process in advance. The staff would have, at least. In the case of Malahide, the conclusion that Malahide had come to was that there was no requirement to expand any urban boundaries, which is actually in perfect alignment with what this particular report is actually stating. So we didn't have full alignment with Southwold, but Southwold was nonetheless approved. With Malahide, we actually do have full alignment with the conclusions of this particular report. And so we approved the Malahide, County Council approved the Malahide OPA, particularly because it was in full alignment with the conclusions of this particular report.
Okay, good.
It's good to know. Yeah, yep, Sally, please.
And that was one of the reasons Central Elgin didn't proceed. We were doing the review, but we said, no, we wanted the county one to be finished so that we knew we were in total alignment. And I will say, as I mentioned, we'll be getting this report on our needs, et cetera. And I mean, I already know the material, but we'll be getting that at our next meeting on Monday. And we could then be going to a public meeting so that we can get our official plan now approved.
Thank you for that. Donna, have you got any questions or
I just have some
observations?
observations or questions about it. It looks like a very complete assessment. I will look at it from an agricultural lens. And so on page 65 and 66, with all of your planning and growth management in relation to agriculture, that I think that there should at least be mention, or there could at least be mention of the section 2.3.2, the agricultural systems approach, for maybe encouraging municipalities to note that section, which states to use an agricultural systems approach to maintain and enhance the geographic continuity of the agricultural land base and the functional and economic connections to the agri-food network. So just when they are looking at the expansion, making sure that it's consistent with the 2.3.2. The only other observation I have, just because of the land use, some of the conflicts we have, is when the lower tiers are looking at expansions, that we are always having to go back to the sections 1.1.3.8, impacts from new or expanding settlement areas on agricultural operations which are adjacent or close to those areas are mitigated to the extent feasible. And I think they all need to be very much aware that they should be mitigated to the extent feasible for any kind of complications that could result with increased residential settlement areas to busy agricultural operations. So that would just be my
Yeah,
observations.
thank you for that. Yeah, Sally, please.
And I like the idea that too, that all of us have the resident, like in our official plans already, there's no new residential land going into agricultural land, that everything, at least I know in Central Elgin, and I believe with this report, we're virtually all there, so that, because that's very important, and it is very important, I believe very strongly in the agricultural community and how important that is to, because that's the basis of basics, Elgin County is an agricultural.
We're facing one instance right now in Southwold with a land swap.
Okay.
I agree with what you're saying, Sally, and you're absolutely right. I know in Banff's perspective, we got a 40-year supply, but these are larger areas within existing boundaries that may or may never be developed. So in that respect, yes, we don't have to have any settlement area expansions taking place, but these things are still farmed. And so there's a perception out there that all of a sudden we're building a house on what is farm, but it's within an urban boundary anyway, there's often a lot of disconnect from the casual observer out there that doesn't quite underappreciate it. So you're right. We are still taking up farmland, but it's within a growth area, and it's an often contestable thing to deal with, but.
And that is something that we strongly considered when we were originally doing it, that we tried not to impede, especially in class 1 and 2 farmland. We didn't designate any of that as residential when we did our original official plan.
I agree. Yeah. Yes, Dominique, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other discussion papers had a bit of a preamble PowerPoint before the actual study, because the study is very comprehensive and meaty.
A lot of reading.
Not accessible necessarily to our audience, and because we do want to hear from everybody. We said at the beginning, all interest groups, and so I'm curious if in this case there will again be kind of that slide deck and with those prompting questions so that people would know, okay, so what am I looking for? Like what should I comment on? What should I pay attention to? So that would be nice to see that.
Thank you for that. And I would defer comment over to our senior staff here at the moment.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, we're happy to prepare a preamble similar to the previous reports that we've done in the past. Happy to do so.
Yeah, okay, great.
Right, yes.
And I would just endorse that, because this is a lot of heavy reading. So it's very important that, and I mean, a lot of people won't understand even what's being considered. So if they really, otherwise you're going to be, you'll either get no response or will be inundated with too many questions.
Yeah, yeah. Great. But overall, I've enjoyed reading the report, and we'll see what comes to pass, eh? Great. Is the committee comfortable then with endorsing and sending it to county council and moving the process forward? I think we should, personally.
Yes.
Okay.
Of the
Well,
introductory.
do we need to work that into the resolution? I think staff understand what we're looking for.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Well, we have a resolution that reads that resolve that the report titled Population, Housing and Employment Forecasts and Associated Land Needs Analysis dated June 10th, 2022 be received by committee and recommended for endorsement by county council. Anyone interested in moving and seconding that?
I'm happy to move that.
Yeah, Councillor Martin and Councillor Jaguar. Is all in favor of that? Good, that's carried. I noticed, I didn't see your hand up at any times, Madam Warden. If you had something you wanted to add, I'm sorry if I missed it. All right, well, thank you, Stefan and Amy and Paul for that. I guess we're going to move on with 6.2, the 2022 Community Grant Program Review. You're welcome to stick around for this enticing discussion, but I think you might have something better to do.
Right,
We will leave you to it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Catherine.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The purpose of this report is to review the community grant program in the context of comments received from the committee on January 5th at our previous meeting, to compare the grant program to other municipal grant programs in the region, and to present recommendations to improve the application package and implementation process for the 2023 grant intake period, which will begin on September 1st. So I won't go through a background about the program and its redevelopment, as this committee was intimately involved and knows what happened. We have been through now 2 years of utilizing our new program. And the committee had asked that staff compare the community grant program to other grant programs in the area. So we selected several comparators based on our local municipal partners and our closest neighbors that had programs that were similar to us. So we decided to choose the town of Elmer, the township of Malahide, the municipality of West Elgin, the municipality of North Middlesex, Norfolk County, and the city of St. Thomas. All in all, and this is the detailed criteria for each of these grant programs is attached as Appendix 1. But all in all, there were many similarities between these grant programs and the County of Elgin's Community Grant Program. There were several ways that sort of stood out that they differed a bit. One was that the majority of these comparators do not indicate which expenses are eligible and which expenses are ineligible, except for the City of St. Thomas, which does simply state that operational costs are ineligible. In general, the focus of eligibility of the comparators is on the organization's eligibility and the program's eligibility. Secondly, the majority of comparators did indicate that the application must demonstrate that there is a need for financial assistance and that adequate funding from other sources is not available. Some require that applying organizations demonstrate they are seeking or receiving alternate sources of financial support or revenue in order to achieve self-sufficiency. The County of Elgin does ask how an organization is funded and why the funding is critical to the operation of the program, service, or event, but does not require specific evidence of alternate funding or self-sufficiency. But it is important to note that we do ask for financials and budget. Several comparators do indicate that the organization must not be in arrears to the municipality to receive funding. And fourthly, the fourth difference was that several comparators do make it explicit that to receive funds, the organization must meet a combination of the following criteria. 1, be located within the municipality granting the funds. 2, provide services that benefit the municipality granting the funds. And or 3, have the majority of service or event participants be from the municipality granting the funds. So those were the main differences that we were able to derive from the comparators. And in the next section, we'll talk about the committee members' comments, recommendations from staff, and incorporate some of the recommendations from what the comparators do that our program currently doesn't do. And just stop me if I'm going through this too quickly. I know that we're on a bit of a time crunch, so I'm trying to get us through it, but please do stop me. So at our meeting held on January 5th, committee members provided valuable feedback regarding the community grant program application and process. The general consensus was that the program is largely sound and its major strength is the eligibility criteria and scoring matrix that provide consistency and equity to the grant process. The program strikes a balance between consideration for taxpayer resources and support for volunteer-based organizations whose activities benefit our communities. But there are ways in which the program could be streamlined and simplified for everyone involved. So the applicants, the committee members scoring, and also the staff who administer the program. So the first general comment from the committee was that there is further definition of the program criteria and eligibility criteria, both the organizational and the expense level, that needs to be clarified in order to remove some ambiguity from the process, not only for applicants, but also for committee members and staff in determining eligibility. One of the main topics was, should Elgin remove limits on expense eligibility and focus on organizational / program outcomes instead of expense eligibility? So this is broken down, the staff recommendations are broken down into the sections that are included in the application in terms of criteria. So there are the program criteria, the eligibility criteria for the organization, and then the expense eligibility. So I'll go through those, and after I need some feedback from the committee on certain items, I'll stop and let the committee give me that feedback. It's important to note that in terms of the program criteria, the eligibility criteria for the organization, and the expense criteria, what the committee does decide will be applied to both the festival and events and the community services. Later, there are some changes that staff recommend only be applied to the festival and events. So the first program criteria, staff found it to be sound, and the committee didn't have many comments on this, but we did notice that we indicate that part of the program criteria is collaboration. So to collaborate to build community capacity and development, but we don't reference this in the scoring matrices, so it's something that we require as a program criteria but don't actually include in the scoring. So staff wanted first direction from the committee as to whether this is something that you'd like us to retain, and in that case include some reference to in the matrices, or if it can be removed. With the idea that collaboration tends to focus on process as opposed to outcome. but it is up to the committee. So this is kind of the first area that staff would like some direction from the committee.
Yes, Sally, please.
I don't know how you would evaluate the collaboration, because they can say they talked to various people or they worked with different things. You don't know for sure. So I think that's a bit vague. I'd be tempted to take it out.
I would concur, like anything that we don't really go back to and verify or have a way of knowing, does it really affect the outcome at the end of the day? So, yeah, it hasn't seemed to influence our decision in the past, so I would be in favor of removing.
Yeah. Mary, do you concur?
Yes, I do.
Well, okay, sounds like you got some direction.
All right, thank you. Wonderful. So moving on, that was really the only area of program criteria. Under eligibility for the organization, we just had some suggestions. Currently, we say that incorporated not-for-profit community associations or unincorporated groups or associations with nonprofit goals and governance structures and or organizations that have a charitable number are eligible. We suggest that to scrap those two and just to say not-for-profit organizations that provide services directly benefiting the County of Elgin are invited to apply for community grant program funding. Just to simplify, because we're saying incorporated or unincorporated groups of charitable members or without, we were thinking that would make it a little bit easier.
I think so. Donna?
I agree. There's many programs that I apply to that state not-for-profits can apply and later on ask for the charitable number. So even those, are
Right.
really conflicting and much easier if it's just one level, not-for-profit community organizations. Yeah.
I think so.
All right, wonderful. And secondly, in this eligibility, we do, staff does recommend, but it is at the committee's discretion, that we follow the formula of other grant programs that require organizations applying to meet two of the following criteria. One, that their office is located in Elgin County. Two, that the program or service benefits Elgin County. And three, that the majority of service/program participants are from the County of Elgin. So by requiring them to qualify for two of the three doesn't preclude organizations that's main office is located in the city of St. Thomas, but does have a large portion of participants in their services or programs being in the County of Elgin. But it does just explicitly state that we want the funds to go to organizations that are benefiting county residents.
I agree with that. The other thing is a lot of the volunteer organizations don't have an office.
That's right.
That's right. That's right.
They couldn't possibly meet that one.
All right, and going down into the section that talks about organizations that do not qualify. One of the things that we haven't explicitly stated in the past is service clubs. We have said fundraising or sponsorship activities and events or programs designed to raise money specifically for others. So that does cover that ineligibility, but I think just to be very specific for the next go round, we want to include service clubs right in there so that organizations applying know from the beginning.
I think that's important because we've had, both times we've had a service club apply to raise money for themselves to then spend on charities, but it's not a specific, other than the one was a specific thing for schools, like iPads for schools. But
I think a little clearer definition within the application itself, yes.
And by a service club, do you need to define what a service club is or not? I mean, those are usually ones with membership. That's all. I'm just saying, because some people might think of themselves as a service club, but they don't have members per se, just anyone can be part of it. Most service clubs have specific memberships. So I don't know if that needs to be clarified or not.
That is something that staff could do.
Take a look at it. I think usually when someone talks about a service club, that's what I'm thinking of.
Ones with membership.
Ones with membership under an international or national structure, of course.
Sure.
And, they are valuable in the community, not, no question. But they can derive their resources elsewhere.
They do a lot of fundraising as it is, yes.
Right, we can,
I don't care, I just am asking if, that, should we just say service clubs that have required membership or something?
Just wondering, is there a club that doesn't have members? If it's a club? I'm trying to think of, could we run into that or? And is that what we're trying to avoid? I think we're,
It's a very good question. You know, you look at the historic societies and a lot of them have an annual membership fee of maybe $10 or something a year. Or you've got other organizations, the Lions, perhaps they're $100 a year membership fee.
And we have a historical society with no membership fees. What
That's right. You know what I mean?
community society has no membership fees, but consider themselves a service club to the community.
And again, they're all, it's really dancing a fine line here because they all contribute back to the community, but
So I said, that's why I'm saying that we should eliminate those with memberships. I don't know, but that is tricky, isn't it?
it is tricky.
Say with historical society.
It's tricky.
You have one with $10 memberships, yeah.
Yeah. It's,
perhaps with,
can you leave it with just service clubs and does that help you get a little closer to the goal?
I think it does help us get a little closer.
I think it does too.
Does it eliminate some, like, then we would say historical societies are not service clubs, the idea,
I would have characterized the historic society as a service club.
even though they have membership. Yeah.
I know.
No, that's fine. That's fine with me. I'm not trying to eliminate anyone.
Right.
Just, I think it's these, as you say, internationally recognized Lions, Rotary, all those,
Absolutely.
the ones that
That's right.
thinking.
Okay.
we're trying to avoid is still the fundraising, getting a grant to fund.
Raise money. Yeah.
That's what you're trying to do.
Right, so is it really the organization we're trying to exclude, or is it the activity?
Well, the activity that we discounted or disqualified was it not a
They were gonna get,
beer garden or something they wanted to run?
oh, that was a wine thing too, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was the one,
Generate revenue.
Funds. Yeah.
funds for them to then donate to other charities.
So-
But the first one, the Optimists we turned down, who were just wanted to raise money, who wanted some grants so that they could buy iPads for all the students at Kettle Creek Public School.
Yeah.
And we said that was ineligible.
Right.
It's tricky.
It's just nice to have it as clear as possible, because those people obviously are confused, they keep applying, different groups.
So what if a service club organizes a festival that is not for fundraising purposes, like that has no, do we turn that down?
I agree with what you're saying. I really do. We want to focus, I think, on the program rather than the organization. That's what you're trying to suggest. And you're right. How do you make the distinction is the problem.
And would the Optimists have thought their program was a service to the community by buying
Right.
iPads for kids?
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, we could argue we don't have, at the time, we were struggling. So perhaps in hindsight, with a clearer criteria, we would say yes to the tablets and no to the beer festival. Do you know what I mean? Because one was clearly to raise funds, whereas the other was not.
To do a service.
To do a service.
Because they didn't understand why they weren't, even after they were told, they still didn't understand why they weren't.
So I don't mind clarifying the criteria, even if that means that perhaps in the past we may have made an error. And that's part of learning and adjusting the criteria along the way. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're not just eliminating one category, because earlier we were saying, we should focus on outcome, focus on the program.
What's the final decision? How you gonna word this?
Sorry, I thought-
Catherine?
Yes, I would suggest we keep service clubs in to clarify, and if there is an application that comes in that staff are unsure what the committee might think, perhaps we could circulate it to the committee to determine whether the committee thinks it should be included.
But then you may get all service clubs just not applying, even if they are trying to
Yeah.
do a service for the community rather than
I think
fundraise.
try to be clear. If we just want to say service clubs, that's fine. We say, you know, we want to encourage other organizations that may not have, because you could argue the service clubs already have a bit of a structure and, you know, they're set up to get grants and to access funds.
We just say fundraising, that no one who is fundraising for themselves is eligible.
Yeah, so it's-
That might be easier than service clubs.
We do, through you, Mr. Chair, we include that already.
Yeah, and it's still into confusion.
But we can leave it that, we can strike service clubs, leave it at that, and leave it at committee discretion.
yeah.
Just because you perhaps suggest on your, the application for service clubs are ineligible, that doesn't preclude them from trying anyway.
But you'll get a lot that
We
won't.
may. I don't think you're gonna end up with,
Trying to make it clearer and not
we've got,
like a kind of try, yeah.
we've got an unlimited pool of requests, but only a small
Right.
little bucket of funds. And trying to winnow it down to where the greatest need is. Yeah, I'd throw I'd just disqualify service clubs.
Okay, let's do it. All right.
Let's just do that.
Okay.
Then,
You know.
moving on, the next few are fairly simple. One is we just want to add that organizations who are in arrears to the county of Elgin or its local municipal partners are not eligible.
Yeah.
The next section is the eligible expenses. So the first question is, do we want to continue to direct whether expenses should be eligible and ineligible?
We're talking about organizational expenses or program
Program
expenses?
expenses.
Program expenses, I think they're all on them, eligible, are they not?
I think we do say operating expenses, capital projects, deficit reduction, and retroactive activity are considered ineligible currently.
Agreed, but
I think we were,
funding the program, like whatever that tends to be. But just to fund the organizational's upkeep, no, we're not interested in that. I don't think so.
yeah, I think in the past, we've run into all of our money, for example, being used for prizes.
Oh, yes.
Is that a good use of, could you not find prizes in the community without accessing tax dollars? And then we run into an entire amount being asked for advertising. Understanding that advertising is very critical. It's the most important part of an event. You have to advertise. So we're starting to, but I remember my overall concern was that on one hand, I personally was not comfortable with some of those expenses, but we were not getting equal information from everybody.
That's right.
So I thought, so I'd hate to almost penalize someone who is transparent about how they're going to spend the money. And some of our applicants had very rudimentary budget. We didn't even know where the money was going. Other than the overall event. And so we supported them almost more blindly than others. So at this point, upon reflection, I'm almost like saying, you know what, if it's a good event, we don't need to play games, because you can always shuffle your money. So, well, we won't tell the county that this is going to be on prizes, so we're just going to put it on the washroom expenses. Meanwhile, at the end of the day, it's a total amount and we're funding it. So I would say the simplest, the better in terms of
Just all expenses.
just all
Program are
expenses.
eligible.
That's not, because again, are we really auditing them and verifying whether they actually spent on specific things? So
If they hire a staff person to coordinate it, or they pay a staff person, is that still okay?
I,
As far as I've been able to read, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I'm just asking. If that-
But-
I agree with Dominique, just.
Yeah.
put it-
as open, capital, I could argue against, because I feel then you're generating an asset that now you own and you've gained that, from county dollars. So I would maybe keep capital.
In the past, it was always understood that it was not capital, because we did have the one fair board out west apply for a second grant, not from this, but a different grant strictly for building a new pavilion. And at that time, it came up again here since this council, but that was when I was on the previous county council.
So I would keep capital. Other than that, if it's towards the event, I think.
Mr. Chair, through you, should we retain deficit reduction and retroactive activity, or?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll remove operating expenses. And should we remove which items are eligible, so that we don't confuse people and only have what are ineligible?
Yeah.
I think ineligible is
Yes.
what you want to list.
Yeah.
Great, wonderful. So that's that section. Then we have a recommendation. The committee did mention that the program administration can be cumbersome and time consuming for staff, given the relatively small investment of grants. Administrative services staff do recommend that we work with IT staff to develop an application form that's in Laserfiche. This form will require that applicants check eligibility boxes and upload all required supporting materials before applying. This will assist them ensuring that they're going through the application in detail to ensure that they themselves believe they're eligible and that they've read it. They have to check every box, and then they will need to ensure before they can submit the application that they have attached everything that's been requested by the committee. That way we don't have too much missing documentation, and we won't even get the form if it's not complete. And they'll need to call if they're having a problem. They can still call and speak to staff, and staff can assist them in any way. But I think it will help people who might accidentally be missing their financials or miss something that we've required of them. The form will trigger that. So that is one suggestion. If the committee is okay with that we'll work with IT and try to streamline that process.
Good idea.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I don't mind that a bit. And again, it acts as a secondary checklist. The one thing that I just got to keep reminding is that not everyone out there is tech savvy, and you're still going to have to assist some to get it done, because I assume you still receive a number of paper copies.
We do, and we'll keep the paper copies available, Mr. Chair.
Well, okay, but you know what I'm trying to suggest, that's all.
Going back to how the financial statements and the budgets, how much they vary, like sometimes we get 10 pages of full, audit, and is that really necessary? And I wonder if it's complicated to attach it to a form. What do we really want to know? Is it just really the overall budget and expenses of the event, so that we can validate they're not spending more than 50%? At which point I'm wondering, what if we didn't ask for documents, but in that form, you enter 4 or 5 boxes in terms of what are your total expenses? So what are you spending on? What's your total budget? And what if that's all we ask?
I think one of the things that we're looking for as well is, do they have alternative sources of funding that they could have tapped?
Yep.
Do they absolutely need the county to do this
Right.
program?
So that's the next question, and you enter here all your sources of funding.
But how do you verify without having the audited statements?
And ideally, yes, but what I'm struggling with is the fact that not all organizations get audited statements.
Yep.
And so we do approve grants to organizations who don't have audited statements. So why are we requiring them? If some can get a grant without audited statements, why can't we do that for everyone?
If we're splitting hairs, not all organizations perhaps hire an auditor to do their statements, but they would have had statements reviewed by perhaps internal committee members, which in my mind still qualifies. Would that be fair, Donna?
It is, Alberta Federation of Agriculture does not have audited statements. We have a book reviewer.
Yep. That's an example.
And that's acceptable for CRA.
Mhm.
Now, I would suggest that even, I just applied to Elmer Foundation, it was the project expense.
Mhm.
It was the organization's projected budget for the year, and the statements, audited statements. Did they need them? I don't know that they actually needed the audited statements, except that it does alert them in case we're in arrears of money.
Pardon?
But I would suggest that really, if staff looked at that and said, nope, they're not in arrears of money, then I don't need to go through their audited statements, just for me, it's a checkbox, but maybe staff has to make sure.
Maybe a list of their assets and liabilities,
Some sort of statement, so.
something very simple rather than, then you know if they're in arrears.
No. I agree, I realize we're short on time. Again, this whole process has been trying to improve consistency. So I would then suggest that the committee, we be more consistent in if an organization does not provide any kind of statements, whether they're reviewed or audited, and then I think we should be a little bit more diligent and go back and ask just for fairness. So to me, we have to go all in. If we request it of everybody, unless there's some sort of exemption letter because they're so small and they're only spending $1,000. Or we don't request from anyone, and if it's easy to attach documents with the form, then that's good too.
I understand that. I guess the observation I would have for the last couple of go-arounds on this is that if the information hadn't been provided, for me, scoring the applicant, they had a very much reduced score. So that was reflective. So if we asked for it, you didn't give it, you reduce your opportunity. So, and I think from the other side of the fact that you need to provide some due diligence on behalf of ratepayers, because you're giving out ratepayer dollars. But I understand what you want to simplify it.
Financial statements rather than audited financial.
That would work.
That-
Financial statements. would-
Every group has financial statements.
So,
Yeah, that would work.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sure.
I can't imagine 4-H have audited statements.
Well, they may not have professionally audited statements, but they would have reviewed statements. Yep.
Over, yeah.
I'm thinking of the local cemetery boards, same thing, except Lauren in our area would review them quite rigorously. Carry on. Let's
Wonderful,
see if
thank
we,
you, Mr. Chair. So the,
and the Tom's budget here.
note, this section of changes only would apply to the festival and events scoring matrices. The idea was to differentiate from community services applications that tend to be submitted by professional staff versus festival and event organizations that have primarily volunteers. So it's mostly around simplifying and clarifying wording, removing a focus on community need and instead focusing on positive impact, as community need makes more sense directed towards the community services. Removing requirements for resources to be targeted to areas of the county facing the greatest need, as this is applicable more to a community service than a festival and event that is usually located in one spot. So the changes proposed were in the application package included as Appendix 2, and they're very simply under design, removing an evidence of targeting it to an area facing the greatest need. Same as the needs impact, removing targeting towards areas of need, and then just some clarifications around the showing evidence of the service will increase participation and engage persons with disabilities. We suggested that they provide us a consideration as to how they will engage these persons with disabilities.
Okay.
Just one comment, and that
Please.
is something I've said before. The people who have a festival and ask for $2,000, and then the people who provide a service and ask for $20,000, and we give a certain percent. I still find that, like, I would like to see some way we could do festivals and events. Even say there's this much money in our budget for festivals and events, and there's this much in it for service clubs, and then we just work out the percentage in the festivals and we work out the other, so that you know, and we could say, or we could, I think the festivals and events would be the easiest way to divide it. But I just would like to see some way, because we'd get people asking for $2,000 or less, and so they get, you know, 1,200 and something, and someone else asks for 20 and gets, you know, 16,000, so I'd just like to see some way of, because the little festival and event who asked or whatever for $2,000 are probably hoping to really get $2,000 and thinking that they will, whereas the service group probably know that they're not gonna get the full thing they asked for, but they know enough to ask for a lot.
Yes,
Mr. Warden, if I may, I'm gonna perhaps,
I've been
with the
elevated.
consent of the committee, suggest perhaps we park this and defer
The
this
budget.
to another meeting, as well as the follow-up report, the third report, which we haven't heard today, so that we can get to our budget meeting, if that's okay.
Certainly.
Is that the consensus of the committee? Good with that?
Yeah, because that we could decide at the time when we know what the envelope is, and then we could decide as a committee if we do want to separate it. Yep,
Well, we do know what the envelope is. We don't know what the ask is.
right, that's,
How far are you from finishing this?
I am basically done.
Can we deal with the motion on the community grant program?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, if everybody is happy with the discussion thus far, the motion is resolved that the report titled 2022 Community Grant Program Review dated May the 27th, 2022, from the Manager of Administrative Services, Deputy Clerk, and Legislative Services Coordinator be received and filed, that the Rural Initiatives and Planning Advisory Committee consider the recommended adjustments to the community grant program as contained in the report titled 2022 Community Grant Program Review and provide additional guidance. We don't need to do that, we already did that. That recommendations from the Rural Initiatives and Planning Advisory Committee be incorporated into the application package, scoring matrix, and implementation process for the 2023 grant intake. Moved by Councillor Jaguar, seconded by Warden French.
I'll give Mary a chance to
All in favor?
hand in.
And that looks like it's carried. Thank you. All right, do we want a deferral motion for the last? Yes, we should. That item 6.3 funding challenge for the town of Elmer regarding the Elmer Malahide Museum archives be deferred. Sally's,
Move that.
okay.
We just don't have time.
We haven't got time. Dominique, you'll second that, thank you. All in favor? Okay,
To meet again soon.
okay, then that takes us to, well, the date of the next meeting, we'll make it up as we come along. Let's have an adjournment motion, and we'll adjourn at 3:37 PM. Mover and seconder, Councillor Jaguar and Warden French. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Your budget meeting is in here as well, isn't it?
Yeah, we're about 7 minutes late for that.